Picture a multi-million-dollar masterpiece vanishing from a completely locked room in the dead of night.
Right. With zero trace.
Yeah, exactly. No shattered skylights, no tripped laser grids. I mean, absolutely no trace of a break-in at all.
Just an empty wall.
Yeah, the only things left behind in the echoing halls of the City Art Museum are an empty gold frame hanging on a wall, disabled security cameras, and like a tiny cryptic three-word note.
A note that honestly proves this thief wasn't motivated by the black market or, the promise of an illicit fortune.
No, not at all. They were motivated by a ghost from 3 centuries ago. Welcome to our deep dive.
So glad you're here with us.
Today, we are stepping into this incredibly atmospheric, impossible crime scene that, surprisingly enough, originates from an educational audio series.
Yeah, it is a truly remarkable piece of source material.
It really is.
We are working with the transcript of a story titled The Missing Painting. It was originally produced for an audio series called Bedtime Story Learning English. And, the whole premise of that show is to combine language acquisition with relaxing, low-stakes narratives. You are meant to turn off the lights, listen to a slow, methodical voice, and just absorb the vocabulary through like a gentle lullaby of a story.
But this particular transcript completely subverts that expectation. I mean, you hit play expecting a soothing tale about, I don't know, a walk in the park.
Yeah, exactly.
And instead, you are immediately plunged into a high-stakes, meticulously constructed locked room mystery.
It's wild.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to completely deconstruct this heist. We are going to map out the physical timeline of the disappearance, analyze the psychological techniques our amateur sleuths use to, outsmart the police.
And crucially, unpack the specific mystery-related vocabulary that the creators so cleverly embedded in the text.
Right, but beyond the mechanics of the crime, we are really going to explore the devastating emotional reality that drove this entire event.
Because that emotional core is what elevates this from just like a simple puzzle box into a really profound piece of storytelling.
Oh, absolutely.
The creators treat the language learner with immense respect here. They understand that you don't acquire language by memorizing sterile lists, right?
Yeah, that never works.
No, you internalize words when they are attached to high emotional stakes. The vocabulary we will examine today isn't just inserted into the dialogue, it is the very architecture of the tragedy.
That's a great way to put it. So let's establish the geography of this night. The atmosphere the transcript paints is just so vivid.
So atmospheric.
It's 2 o'clock in the morning. The city is completely silent. It's that heavy, dead-of-night quiet where even the hum of a refrigerator sounds incredibly loud,
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
And then that silence is completely shattered by the ringing of a telephone.
Which is terrifying. The psychology of a 2.0 a.m. phone call is universal.
The worst.
The human brain is just not conditioned to expect good news in the middle of the night. When a phone rings at that hour, your body just bypasses waking up and goes straight into a sympathetic nervous system response.
You're flooded with adrenaline before you even pick up the receiver.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate dread. I always compare it to getting a vague text from your boss on a Sunday afternoon saying, we need to talk.
Oh, that's the absolute worst text to get.
Right, but amplified to an existential degree. And our protagonist, Sarah, wakes up in exactly this state of panic.
She answers the phone, and on the other end is her friend Alex.
And Alex is in a state of total, frantic terror. He works weekends at the City Art Museum, and the authorities have just called him in.
Because the most famous, heavily guarded painting in their entire collection has vanished.
The transcript immediately establishes the value of the missing object, both financially and historically.
Yes, the piece is called The Blue Lady.
It's a 300-year-old portrait of an unnamed woman in a blue dress seated beside a window. And Alex makes sure to mention that the painting is worth millions.
Right, and by inserting that specific detail, the story lays a trap for our assumptions.
It sets up the classic heist paradigm. You hear worth millions, and your mind immediately jumps to an organized syndicate.
Or a wealthy private collector commissioning a theft, or, a desperate criminal looking to fence a priceless artifact for a massive payout.
Yeah, exactly. But the physical parameters of how the painting disappeared completely defy that logic. Let's look at the timeline because it is incredibly tight.
Very tight.
The museum has a night security guard, a man named Mr. Hassan. His logs show that he completed a patrol of room 7.
That's the specific gallery where the Blue Lady is exhibited, right?
Right, room 7. He checked it at exactly 11:00 p.m. Everything was secure, The canvas was in its frame, the room was empty, the museum was locked down.
But by 1:30 a.m., when Mr. Hassan returned for his subsequent patrol, the wall was bare.
Empty.
That gives us a window of exactly 2.5 hours for a multi-million-dollar asset to evaporate.
Which is crazy, and the physical environment of that disappearance is what makes it a classic impossible crime.
Right, because there are zero signs of forced entry.
None. Alex tells Sarah that there are no shattered windows, there are no broken locks on the exterior doors.
And the elaborate museum alarm system, which should have detected any unauthorized presence, never made a single sound.
In the realm of mystery literature, this is known as a closed circle scenario.
Yes. If external entry is physically impossible, the threat must be internal.
Exactly. The police operate on the principle of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation for an unbroken perimeter is that the perpetrator didn't need to break in.
They had a key.
Which brings us to the source of Alex's midnight panic attack. There are only 4 keys to the museum in existence.
4 keys. That's it.
And Alex possesses one of them. The other 3 belong to the museum director, Mr. Romano,
Okay.
the head of security, Linda Park, and the night cleaner, Victor.
Wow, so the suspect pool shrinks from the entire population of the city down to 4 individuals.
And from the perspective of the police, Alex is the perfect scapegoat. He is a part-time weekend employee.
Right, he likely doesn't have the salary of the director, providing a potential financial motive.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the narrative uses this intense claustrophobic setup to introduce the first core vocabulary word for the learner.
Ah, yes. The word stolen.
It is a vital distinction in this environment.
It really is, because in the sprawling ecosystem of a major museum, objects can temporarily disappear without any malicious intent at all,
Right. A piece might be removed for restoration or placed in temporary storage.
or prepped for a loan to a different institution, and perhaps the night guard simply wasn't briefed on it.
But the word stolen eradicates the possibility of an administrative error. To steal something means to unlawfully appropriate property with the explicit intent to permanently deprive the rightful owner of it.
Right. It requires malice, planning, and a deliberate crossing of a legal and moral boundary.
When Alex uses that word, he is telling Sarah that a crime has definitively occurred and he is the prime suspect.
Sarah's response to this is just fascinating. She doesn't hesitate.
Not for a second.
She doesn't question his innocence for a fraction of a second. She tells him it's an absurd accusation because she knows he cherishes that museum.
But she understands the optics of the situation. Alex begs her to come to the museum because he knew he could rely on her.
And she simply replies, always.
That one word, always, does so much heavy lifting. It establishes their whole dynamic.
Yes, she is his anchor.
And so Sarah ventures out into the night. The sensory details the transcript uses here are wonderful. She arrives at the museum, and the scene is painted with the reflection of red and blue police lights.
Flashing across the wet, rain-slicked pavement.
Yeah, the grand, imposing architecture of the museum is surrounded by the chaotic energy of law enforcement.
And when she finds Alex, he hits her with a detail that introduces our second major vocabulary concept.
The thief didn't take the entire piece of art. The massive, ornate gold frame is still bolted to the wall.
The canvas itself was cut out.
And Sarah processes this information and immediately categorizes the perpetrator. She says, a professional, someone who knows what they're doing.
Let's dissect the use of the word professional here, because it operates on a few different levels.
Okay, let's do it.
If a random amateur, say, a teenager looking for a thrill, or an opportunistic burglar who just happened to find an unlocked door,
Right.
if they tried to remove a 300-year-old canvas from its housing in the dark, the result would be catastrophic.
Oh, it would be an absolute massacre of the material. Canvas that old is incredibly fragile. It requires specific tension to avoid cracking the oil paint.
Exactly. An amateur would likely hack at it with a dull blade, leaving jagged, frayed edges, or pull too hard and tear the fabric straight through the center of the image.
But Alex describes the cut as exceptionally clean and precise, which implies steady hands, a specialized tool, and a complete lack of panic.
A professional operates with a chilling level of competence. They aren't rushing.
But I do want to throw a wrench into this assumption for a moment. Let's look at the logic of leaving the frame behind.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
If this truly is a professional art thief operating on behalf of a black market buyer, why spend precious minutes standing in a dark gallery, meticulously slicing an ancient canvas?
When you have already bypassed the alarms and the locked doors?
Yeah. The gold frame itself probably holds significant antique value. Why risk damaging the multi-million-dollar merchandise with a knife? Why not just unhook the entire apparatus and walk out?
It's an excellent counterargument, and it
Yeah.
points to a profound psychological discrepancy in the crime scene.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, a purely profit-driven thief wants the commodity in its most pristine, saleable condition. Slicing the canvas degrades its structural integrity.
Definitely.
But the act of leaving the frame tells us something critical about the thief's worldview.
Yeah.
The frame represents the institution.
The frame is the museum's method of boxing, displaying, and owning the artifact.
Exactly. By meticulously separating the canvas from the frame, the thief is indicating that they assign zero value to the physical object as a museum asset.
Oh.
They only care about the image. They only care about the woman in the blue dress. They are liberating her from her institutional housing. It is an act of extraction, not mere theft.
That fundamentally changes the profile of the criminal, and it brings us directly to the third crucial vocabulary word in the text: suspicious.
Yes, which is embodied physically by the character of Detective Brown.
Right, he intercepts Sarah as soon as she enters the building. Detective Brown represents the rigid, empirical force of the state. He has a deep, authoritative voice.
And his immediate reaction to Sarah's presence is profound skepticism.
When she introduces herself as Alex's friend who has come to help, he looks at her and asks, "Help with what, exactly?"
To be suspicious is to harbor a lingering, corrosive doubt about someone's motives or the truth of a situation, even without concrete evidence.
It is a state of hypervigilance. Detective Brown doesn't trust Sarah because she is an uncontrolled variable in his crime scene.
But the concept of suspicion extends far beyond his demeanor. It perfectly encapsulates the physical evidence they discuss next.
Yeah, once Sarah convinces him to let her inside, they stand in the echoing, marble-floored corridors of the museum. The silence inside is heavy.
And Brown reveals a detail that tightens the noose around Alex. He says the security cameras in room 7 stopped recording at exactly midnight.
Sarah immediately grasps the implication. Technology failing at the stroke of midnight is not a mechanical coincidence.
No, it is an intentional act of sabotage. And because the exterior perimeter was never breached, that sabotage had to be executed from a terminal inside the building.
The timeline snaps into terrifying focus. Hassan checks the room at 11:00 p.m. The cameras are manually blinded at midnight. The empty frame is discovered at 1:30 a.m.
It is a surgical strike orchestrated by someone with an intimate operational knowledge of the museum's infrastructure.
So we have now fully established the how of the crime: the physical mechanics, the disabled cameras, the cleanly severed canvas, the unbroken locks.
They all paint a clear picture of internal sabotage.
But physical mechanics alone cannot secure a conviction or explain the motive. The narrative must now transition from a cold forensic analysis into something much more complex.
To find the why, our characters have to actually look at the void left behind.
Right. Sarah, Alex, and Detective Brown walk in silence down a long hallway lined with centuries of art, finally arriving at room 7.
The visual contrast is striking. Ornate, classical paintings surround a single, glaringly empty gold square.
Sarah looks at the wall and says, "It looks so sad."
That is a remarkable reaction. She doesn't remark on the financial loss or the audacity of the crime.
No, she personifies the empty space. She recognizes the melancholy of absence.
And while Sarah is having this emotional reaction to the architecture, Detective Brown is operating entirely within his procedural programming.
He turns his attention to Alex and demands to know his exact whereabouts between 11:00 p.m. and 1:30 a.m. He is looking for an alibi.
And Alex provides an alibi that is entirely plausible, yet utterly useless to law enforcement. He states that he was in his apartment, alone, reading a book.
It is the nightmare scenario for anyone caught in a police dragnet. Your innocence is completely mundane and therefore completely indefensible.
Right. If he had been at a crowded bar with 20 witnesses and security footage of him ordering a drink, he would be safe.
But reading a book alone in your apartment leaves zero footprint. This brings up the next vital vocabulary word: confirm.
Detective Brown listens to Alex's alibi and immediately asks, can anyone confirm that?
The burden of proof is central to the legal system. To confirm something is to elevate it from a subjective claim to an objective reality through independent verification.
Exactly. Detective Brown cannot arrest a man based on a hunch, but he also cannot clear a suspect based on their own self-serving statement.
He requires an external anchor, a witness, a digital receipt, a cell phone tower ping. Because Alex was engaged in a solitary analog activity, his reality is unconfirmable.
From the detective's perspective, this lack of confirmation crystallizes Alex's guilt. He has the key, he has the institutional knowledge, and he has a phantom alibi.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the narrative shifts gears entirely. While Brown is trying to tighten the psychological screws on Alex, Sarah steps closer to the wall.
She asks to examine the frame. Brown immediately barks an order, telling her not to touch the evidence.
Which is standard protocol, you know. A crime scene is a fragile ecosystem of potential microscopic evidence, but Sarah promises not to disturb anything.
She leans in closely, studying the severed fibers of the canvas.
And then she notices an anomaly that fundamentally alters the trajectory of the investigation. Tucked discreetly into the bottom corner of the heavy gold frame is a small, folded piece of paper.
This moment is absolutely stunning. Sarah is hyper-aware of the rules, so she doesn't use her fingers.
Yeah, she takes a pen from her pocket and uses the tip to carefully extract the paper, ensuring she doesn't leave fingerprints.
She unfolds it. Written in ink are 3 simple words. She came home.
The reaction from Detective Brown is one of genuine shock. He states, flatly, "My team did not find any paper."
This raises an important question, though. We have to pause and dissect the sheer audacity of this plot point.
Let's do it.
An entire forensic unit, trained specifically to process crime scenes, armed with floodlights and evidence kits, completely overlooked a handwritten note.
Tucked into the only piece of physical evidence left by the thief.
Yeah, and a civilian who was roused from sleep at 2 in the morning found it in 30 seconds. How do we reconcile that? Is it a failure of police work, or is it something deeper about human perception?
It is a profound commentary on the nature of perception itself. We see what we are conditioned to look for.
Right. The forensic team was operating under the paradigm of a high-stakes financial crime.
They were scanning the environment for the microscopic detritus of a break-in, a snuff mark from a rubber sole, a stray fiber from a sweater, the metallic residue of a lockpick.
Their gaze was clinical and heavily filtered by their assumptions. The note didn't register to them because a poetic, handwritten message does not fit the profile of an organized art syndicate.
They were looking for data, not narrative.
Exactly. But Sarah entered that room with a different paradigm. As we noted earlier, her first reaction to the empty frame was empathy.
She felt the sadness of the space.
Right. Because she was engaging with the environment emotionally, she was capable of recognizing an emotional artifact. The police filtered the note out as irrelevant debris. Sarah saw it as a voice.
A voice reaching out across 300 years. When Alex hears those 3 words, "She came home," the color drains from his face.
He recognizes the phrase immediately. The lore of the Blue Lady is not just a footnote. It is the key to the entire mystery.
Alex recounts the legend to Sarah and the detective. The legend is a tragedy embedded within the art itself.
Yeah, Alex explains that the true identity of the woman in the portrait has been lost to history. But the artist who painted her did so in the throes of immense heartbreak.
The woman he loved deeply was taken from him. She left the city and she never returned.
In his grief, the artist poured his memory of her onto the canvas, and his original title for the piece was The Lady Who Never Came Home.
It transforms the painting from a beautiful object into a monument to unresolved grief. And now, 3 centuries later, someone bypasses a modern security system
Slices the woman out of the frame.
and leaves a note directly answering a 300-year-old lament. She came home. It is a conversation spanning centuries.
Sarah synthesizes this new information with breathtaking speed. She realizes the note completely invalidates the police theory of a black market heist.
A fence looking to sell stolen property does not leave poetic clues referencing historical legends.
Right. Sarah turns to the detective and articulates a new psychological profile of the thief. She asserts that the perpetrator didn't take the painting for financial gain.
They took it because they believe the woman in the portrait fundamentally belongs somewhere else.
They didn't steal a commodity, they staged a rescue mission.
Yes. Sarah uses a critical piece of vocabulary to define this new motive. She says the thief took it because they feel a connection to the painting.
And this leads her to the question that cracks the case wide open. She asks the room, who in this museum has a personal connection to the Blue Lady?
Let's explore the weight of the word connection here because it is the fulcrum on which the entire story pivots.
A connection is a tether. It is a relationship or a deep-seated link between 2 entities.
Up until this moment, the police have been investigating physical connections. Who had the key? Who had the security code? Who had the physical proximity?
But Sarah demands they look for an emotional tether. She redefines the parameters of access.
A key grants you access to a room. but a profound emotional connection grants you the motive to risk your freedom.
She forces everyone to stop looking at the suspect pool as employees and start looking at them as human beings with histories.
So we run through the list again. Victor the night cleaner possesses a key. He has physical access. But does he have an emotional tether to a 300-year-old portrait?
Very unlikely.
Linda Park, the head of security, understands the cameras and has a key. But does she have a connection? The room falls silent. Everyone is mentally scanning the staff roster.
And then Alex, speaking very softly, retrieves a memory that changes everything. He says the name. Mr. Romano.
The director of the City Art Museum, the man at the absolute pinnacle of the institution.
Alex recalls a fleeting, quiet moment that seemed insignificant at the time. He remembers that Mr. Romano had once mentioned in passing that his grandmother was a painter who had lived in the city generations ago.
But the truly damning memory is a visual one. Alex once found the director standing alone in room 7, staring intently at the blue lady.
He wasn't assessing the lighting or the security of the frame. He was lost in it.
When Alex approached and asked him about it, Romano didn't offer an art history lecture. He simply murmured, "She looks like someone I used to know."
It is a line that carries the weight of an anchor. In the context of the museum, it sounds like a poetic appreciation.
In the context of a heist and a hidden note, it sounds like a confession of generational recognition. It implies a familiarity that defies the bounds of a normal human lifespan.
Armed with this devastating realization, Sarah, Alex, and Detective Brown pivot. They leave the empty gallery and march straight toward the administrative wing.
They're heading for the director's office. The atmosphere shifts dramatically here. We move from the vast, echoing marble spaces of public exhibition into the claustrophobic, heavy silence of executive power.
They approach a thick oak door. The knock echoes in the hallway. When Romano answers, the transcript describes his voice not as commanding or authoritative, but as a tired, old voice.
They enter to find him sitting behind a massive desk. He looks thoroughly exhausted, as if the weight of the entire night has settled onto his shoulders.
Detective Brown, relentless as ever, immediately attempts to reestablish the procedural dynamic. He stands over the desk and fires his standard interrogation question.
He demands to know where Mr. Romano was between midnight and 1:30 a.m.
And we are presented with a fascinating parallel. Romano's defense is identical to Alex's.
He claims he was in his office, working late, alone.
He has no witnesses. He has no digital footprint to verify his location within the building. His alibi is entirely unconfirmable.
Detective Brown is practically vibrating with the implications. He has 2 suspects with the means, the opportunity, and no alibis.
He's preparing to launch into a full-scale interrogation, looking for inconsistencies to tear Romano's story apart.
But Sarah intervenes. She recognizes that aggressive pressure will only cause a man like Romano to raise his defenses.
She steps in front of the detective and completely changes the frequency of the conversation. She doesn't ask about times or cameras or keys.
She asks a question rooted purely in empathy. She looks at him and asks, "Who is she? The woman in the painting, do you know?"
Romano's initial reaction is defensive. He points out that Sarah is not a police officer. She has no authority to interrogate him.
But Sarah's response is a masterclass in de-escalation. She says, "No, I am just someone who wants to understand."
She strips away the adversarial dynamic. She isn't trying to trap him. She's offering him the one thing he has likely never had.
An audience willing to listen to the truth. And the silence that follows is thick. You can practically hear the decades of secrecy warring with the sudden, overwhelming desire to finally unburden himself.
Romano looks at Sarah, then at Alex, and finally his resolve breaks. His voice drops to a whisper, and he reveals the secret. He says, "Her name was Elena Romano."
The woman in the painting is his great-grandmother. It is a revelation that fundamentally shatters everything we thought we knew about the painting, the museum, and the crime.
The anonymous muse in the blue dress is family. She has a name, a lineage, and a tragic history that Romano finally brings into the light.
He explains the reality behind the legend. Elena Romano was a brilliant, vibrant young woman who fell completely, irrevocably in love with the artist who painted her.
But their love was condemned. And this brings us to the next crucial vocabulary word in our deep dive. The family did not approve.
The word approve, in a familial context, carries immense social and emotional weight. To approve means to formally validate, to accept a situation or a person as satisfactory.
When a family withers you with their disapproval, it is not merely a difference of opinion, it is a systemic rejection.
It means they view the relationship as fundamentally flawed, inappropriate, or socially damaging. And the Romanov family's disapproval was not passive, it was violently active.
They didn't just refuse to bless the union, they physically severed the relationship. They exiled Elena.
They sent her away to another country, ensuring she would never see the painter again. The artist's heartbreak was so profound that he captured her memory on canvas, creating The Lady Who Never Came Home.
But the tragedy compounds. Romano reveals that generations later the family fell on hard times. They needed capital.
And so, they looked at the portrait of the daughter they had banished, and they sold it.
The cruelty of that act is staggering. It is
Yeah.
double betrayal.
They exiled the living woman because she threatened their social standing, and then they monetized her image when it suited their financial needs.
They turned her heartbreak into an asset. The painting was absorbed into the institutional machinery of the art world, eventually landing on the walls of the City Art Museum.
To be stared at by thousands of strangers who knew nothing of her pain. This historical trauma is the engine driving the entire narrative.
Romano looks at the three of them and makes a confession that borders on the unbelievable.
He says that he spent his entire adult life, decades of his existence, working his way through the cutthroat world of arts administration.
He studied, he networked, he climbed the brutal hierarchy of the museum world, all with a singular obsessive goal.
He became the director of the City Art Museum just to be close to her, just to protect her.
It forces us to entirely reevaluate his character. He isn't an administrator, he's a sentinel.
He infiltrated the very institution that held his family's history hostage. He spent his life acquiring the ultimate level of clearance, gaining the master key, mastering the security protocols.
Not for power, but for proximity to his exiled great-grandmother.
So what does this all mean? This brings us to a massive moral crossroads and introduces the vocabulary word personal.
Detective Brown, representing the inflexible letter of the law, asks the ultimate question. Mr. Romano, did you take the painting?
And Romano doesn't flinch. He whispers, I only wanted to bring her home. My family's home. She was never supposed to be in a museum. She was supposed to be loved.
He confesses to the mechanics of the crime. He used his master key. He blinded the security cameras. He took a knife and meticulously cut his great-grandmother out of her institutional cage.
The word personal defines this act entirely. The theft was not an attack on the museum's balance sheet. It was an intensely private act of historical correction.
The painting is not an artifact to him. It is an ancestral tether. His connection bypasses the legal definition of ownership and taps into the primal realm of blood and memory.
I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, to grapple with this dilemma. Imagine an old man who discovers that a pawn shop is selling his grandmother's stolen wedding ring.
He knows the history. He knows the ring was taken violently from his family generations ago.
The pawn shop acquired it legally on paper, but morally, it is a stolen legacy. If that man breaks the glass in the dead of night and takes the ring back to his home, taking nothing else, is he a criminal?
The law says yes. He committed breaking and entering, destruction of property, and theft.
But does morality say yes?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the conflict between institutional law and restorative justice. Museums are inherently complex entities.
Their mandate is to preserve and educate, but the act of preservation often requires stripping an object of its original intimate context.
An object of deep personal devotion is transformed into a public exhibit. Romano's act is illegal, undeniably.
But morally, he is righting a 300-year-old wrong. He is finally giving Elena the homecoming her family denied her in life.
This philosophical tension reaches its peak when Romano slowly stands up from his desk. The room is dead silent.
He walks to a large, heavy closet in the corner of his office and opens the door. And there she is, the stolen canvas.
The transcript's description of the painting in this moment is incredibly evocative. Freed from the heavy gold frame and the glaring gallery lights, the woman in the blue dress is described simply.
The narrator notes that her eyes are gentle and sad.
It strips away the aura of the masterpiece and returns her to humanity. She isn't the Blue Lady anymore. She is Elena.
Romano stands before the canvas with tears shining in his eyes. He looks at Sarah and the detective and says, I know what I did was wrong, but when I look at her, I see my whole family, all the love and the sadness and the years gone by.
The atmosphere in the office is completely transformed. It ceases to be an interrogation room. It becomes a space of reverence and shared grief.
Even Detective Brown, the hardened procedural cop who was ready to slap cuffs on someone 20 minutes ago, is rendered completely silent.
He realizes that the law is utterly inadequate to address the depth of what is happening here.
And Alex, who spent the entire night terrified of going to prison, gazes at the severed canvas and simply whispers, She is beautiful.
It is a moment of collective catharsis. The puzzle of the locked room has been solved. The physical asset has been located.
But the victory is hollow because the emotional truth of the situation leaves everyone in that room fundamentally altered. The crime has been demystified, but the tragedy remains intact.
Which brings us to the final movement of our deep dive, the fallout. Eventually, the night must end.
The story transitions from the heavy, emotionally suffocating atmosphere of the director's office to the exterior of the museum. It is dawn.
The sky is beginning to turn pink, and the sound of birds singing replaces the echoing silence of the marble halls.
The use of dawn is a classic literary device. It signifies a reset. The claustrophobia of the dark, rainy night is broken by the light of a new day.
It allows the characters, and you, the listener, to finally exhale. The immediate crisis is over, and the process of normalization begins.
Sarah and Alex are standing together on the pavement, watching the police coordinate their next steps. The adrenaline has faded, leaving them both exhausted.
Sarah asks the pragmatic question that has to be addressed. What will happen to him? What is the fate of Mr. Romano?
He has confessed to a massive felony. Will he spend his final years in a concrete cell?
Detective Brown emerges from the building, and his demeanor has softened dramatically. The rigidity of the law has been tempered by humanity.
He offers a realistic but surprisingly hopeful assessment of Romano's legal jeopardy. He notes two mitigating factors. Romano is an elderly man, and crucially, he returned the painting without resistance.
This introduces our next vocabulary word, immediately. Brown notes that once confronted, Romano surrendered the canvas immediately.
To do something immediately means to act without hesitation, delay, or intervention. In a legal context, this is a massive factor.
Romano didn't try to negotiate. He didn't demand a lawyer. He didn't attempt to destroy the evidence or flee.
His immediate contrition and cooperation are the exact mechanisms that might convince a judge to show leniency, perhaps substituting prison time with probation or house arrest.
The creators of the audio story reinforced this vocabulary word a moment later in a completely different, much lighter context, which is brilliant for language retention.
Yes, the tension breaks with a moment of genuine warmth between the friends. Sarah, who is running on empty, leans against the wall and says to Alex, "Next time someone calls you at 2 in the morning about a stolen painting."
And before she can even finish the threat, Alex interrupts her and says, "I will call you immediately."
It's a wonderful humanizing moment. It cements their dynamic. Despite the terror and the exhaustion of the night, he wouldn't hesitate to rely on her again, and she knows it.
It anchors the word immediately to both a serious legal consequence and a lighthearted promise between friends.
But before they part ways to finally get some coffee and sleep, Alex looks back at the museum. His mind is still lingering on the canvas hidden in the closet.
He poses a deeply philosophical question to Sarah. He asks, "Do you think she really looked like the painting, Elena?"
It is an incredible inquiry regarding the nature of historical record versus artistic interpretation.
Was the artist acting as a human camera, objectively documenting the geometry of her face? Or was the act of painting a subjective filter?
Sarah considers this, and she delivers a line that I believe is the thematic thesis of the entire story. She looks at Alex and says, "I think the painter loved her very much. And when you love someone, you see all the best things about them."
It is a breathtaking observation. Sarah is articulating the idea that love acts as a lens. The portrait is not an objective reality. It is an emotional map.
The artist didn't just mix pigments to match her skin tone. He painted his reverence for her. He painted the kindness in her eyes, the grace of her posture, the very essence of why he loved her.
The painting is a collaboration between her physical reality and his fierce affection.
When you love someone, you see all the best things about them. That line completely rewires how you think about art.
It suggests that a portrait is never just a face. It is a visual record of how the subject was perceived by a heart that cherished them.
And this brings us to the true pedagogical genius of this source material. The creators of Bedtime Story Learning English are using profound emotional philosophy as a vehicle for vocabulary retention.
When a language learner encounters words like connection, approve, or immediately within the sterile confines of a textbook, they memorize the definition, but they don't feel the weight of the word.
But when you learn the word approve by understanding the generational devastation of a family banishing their daughter,
Or when you learn connection by watching an old man risk his entire life to liberate his great-grandmother's exiled image.
the vocabulary becomes permanently anchored in your mind through empathy. You don't just know the definition, you understand the soul of the word.
It proves that language is inextricably linked to narrative. We define our world through stories.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the narrator's closing monologue. As Sarah and Alex walk away, the deep, warm voice of the narrator returns, wrapping the story up for the listener.
The narrator says, "And so, the mystery of the Blue Lady was solved, not by anger or greed, but by love, old love, the kind that never fully goes away."
And then they deliver our final vocabulary words. Sometimes the people who do wrong things have the most tender hearts.
Tender. It is a word that signifies gentleness, sensitivity, and a capacity for deep affection.
It is the antithesis of the callousness we normally associate with criminality.
It is the ultimate paradox of the story. Society conditions us to believe that those who commit felonies, those who slice ancient canvases and sabotage security systems, must be hardened, dangerous individuals.
But Mr. Romano committed a major crime precisely because his heart was too tender. He was too sensitive to the echoes of the past.
He couldn't bear the thought of Elena being stared at by apathetic crowds in a cold institution when she belonged to the warmth of a family home.
His crime was an act of profound gentleness.
The narrator concludes the audio story with a deeply melancholic observation that lingers long after the tape stops playing. They say, "And sometimes the most beautiful things in life are the things we cannot keep."
That line is devastating. The things we cannot keep. Apply that to Romano's life. Think about the sheer scale of his dedication.
He spent 30, maybe 40 years plotting this reunion. He sacrificed his life to reach the pinnacle of the museum hierarchy.
He finally executed his plan. He finally brought Elena out of the frame. But he only got to keep her for a few hours.
The sun rose, the police arrived, the canvas will be restored and returned to the wall, and his career and freedom are effectively over.
He brought her home, but he couldn't keep her.
It is the tragedy of permanence versus the fleeting nature of experience. But as Alex noted right before they left, perhaps the length of time doesn't negate the value of the act. He says, "She went home. For one night at least."
For one night, she wasn't an inventory item with a multi-million-dollar insurance valuation. For one night, she was just Elena, surrounded by the family that loved her.
It is an ephemeral victory, but maybe that single night of restoration was worth the decades of waiting.
To pack that level of bittersweet, complex philosophy into a beginner-level language exercise is a staggering achievement in educational design.
It truly is. It redefines what educational media can be.
Let's recap the incredible journey we have untangled today. We begin this deep dive with all the hallmarks of a breathless, locked-room thriller.
A priceless masterpiece vanishing into thin air, a 2.5-hour window of impossibility, disabled cameras, severed canvas.
Then a frantic prime suspect cornered by an aggressive detective.
But by shifting our perspective from the mechanics of the crime to the emotional truth of the environment,
By noticing the small, handwritten note that the procedural gaze overlooked,
we uncovered an entirely different reality.
we unearthed a 300-year-old tale of forbidden love, a family whose violent disapproval led to lifelong exile.
And the quiet, monumental dedication of a great-grandson who spent his life infiltrating an institution just to stage a rescue mission.
We transitioned from a story about greed to a profound meditation on generational grief.
And through it all, we unpacked the deep, resonant meanings of words like stolen, professional, suspicious, confirm, connection, approve, personal, immediately, and tender.
It demonstrates that the mechanics of a mystery are only as compelling as the human heart beating at its center.
Exactly.
And now I want to turn the focus over to you, our listener. This story fundamentally challenges how we assign value to the objects that surround us.
I want you to mentally scan your own life. Look around your room, your home, your workspace.
What object do you possess that holds absolutely zero financial value to the outside world? A faded photograph, an inherited trinket, a worn piece of fabric?
But carries a personal connection so deep, so fiercely tender, that you would go to the ends of the earth to protect it.
What is your version of the Blue Lady? What is the artifact that anchors you to your own history?
Because every single one of us is a curator of our own deeply subjective museum.
We all harbor objects that serve as physical bridges to the people we love and the past we refuse to let go of.
We absolutely do.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to carry with you. Think back to Sarah's profound realization that a portrait is shaped by the affection of the artist.
When you love someone, you see all the best things about them.
Think about the massive implications of that idea the next time you walk through the hallowed marble halls of the Louvre or the Met or the City Art Museum.
When you look up at the thousands of historical portraits staring down at you from their heavy gold frames.
Are you actually looking at objective history?
Yeah.
Or are those vast museums simply giant, echoing halls filled with nothing but the biased, fiercely subjective, highly edited memories of people who are deeply in love?
Keep looking closely.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive.